There's a particular kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You can get 8 hours, wake up with no plans, no crisis, no reason to feel this way, and still lie there thinking, I don't want to do any of it. Not the big things, not the small ones either. Answering a text feels heavy. Making a decision feels heavy. Existing today feels heavy. Most people call this burnout or laziness, or a bad mood that will pass. And sometimes it is exactly that. But there's a version of this feeling that's quieter and stranger. Not sadness, not despair, just a kind of flatness, a sense of being tired of the effort of being a person. Getting up, responding, choosing, performing normal. And the strange part is, nothing dramatic caused it, which is exactly why it's so hard to explain to anyone, including yourself. So the question worth asking isn't, why am I so lazy, or what's wrong with me? It's smaller and more precise. What is the mind actually trying to conserve right now? Because that flatness isn't the absence of feeling. It's usually the result of too much feeling, processed too long, with nowhere to go. Here's the mechanism. The brain doesn't have unlimited resources for regulation, for managing emotions, filtering stimulation, making decisions, tolerating other people's needs. Researchers sometimes describe this as a kind of finite capacity that gets spent throughout the day, refilled by rest, connection, and genuine downtime. When that capacity runs low for long enough, not for one hard day, but for weeks or months of unspectacular pressure, something in the system starts to ration itself, not through a dramatic breakdown, through a quiet withdrawal of enthusiasm. The mind starts treating ordinary tasks the way a phone treats battery at 2%. It doesn't turn off, but it starts closing background apps you didn't even know were running. This is why the exhaustion doesn't always come from anything you'd point to. It's rarely one event. It's usually an accumulation. Small emotional taxes paid daily that never got refunded. Answering messages you didn't want to answer. Being pleasant when you didn't feel pleasant. Holding your reactions in rooms where honesty wasn't welcome. None of these cost much individually, but the nervous system doesn't average things out over a lifetime. It keeps a running total. And here's where it gets more specific. Because being tired of existing isn't really about existence. It's about the specific version of existing you've been maintaining. For a lot of people, especially those who grew up needing to be easy, agreeable, low maintenance, or high achieving to feel safe or valued, there's a self that runs in the background at all times, a monitored self, checking how it's coming across, adjusting, softening, performing competence even in private thought. This isn't insincerity, it's adaptation. If being too much once cost you closeness, or being not enough once cost you approval, the mind learns to manage itself constantly, long after the original reason is gone. That management has a cost, and the cost is cumulative. What looks like apathy today might actually be the long-term bill for years of self-monitoring that never got to switch off. This is where the paradox shows up, and it's one people rarely expect. The exhaustion isn't a malfunction, it's evidence that the system worked exactly as designed. A person capable of sustaining high performance, agreeableness, or emotional restraint for years is not weak. They're someone whose regulation system has been extremely effective for a very long time, without maintenance. The flatness isn't your character failing, it's your nervous system finally sending an invoice. That reframe matters, because most people respond to this tiredness with more pressure. They interpret the flatness as a discipline problem and try to fix it by pushing harder, more structure, more motivation, more forcing themselves through it. But effort was never the missing ingredient. Recovery was. And recovery isn't the same as rest. You can sleep for 10 hours and still not recover, because recovery specifically requires the absence of demand. No performing, no problem solving, no managing anyone's experience, including your own. Scrolling isn't that. Binging a show while half monitoring notifications isn't that either. True recovery is rarer than people think, because most of what we call rest is actually just a different form of low-grade output. There's also a quieter trade-off hiding underneath all this, one that rarely gets named. The people most susceptible to this kind of existential fatigue are often the same people others describe as reliable, calm, easy to be around. That's not a coincidence. It's the mechanism. The steadiness other people experience as your personality is frequently the output of continuous internal labor they never see, which means the very traits that make you trusted are often the traits quietly draining you. Nobody sends flowers for emotional labor they didn't know was happening. And once you see this pattern, you start noticing it doesn't only apply to burnout. It shows up anywhere a system runs on suppressed cost. A relationship where one person keeps the peace by absorbing more than their share. A job where competence gets rewarded with more responsibility instead of more support. Even attention itself works this way. The mind can only sustain focus, patience, or warmth for so long before something quietly withdraws, whether or not you notice it withdrawing. So, when someone feels tired of existing, not suicidal, not in crisis, just weary of the ongoing effort of being a functioning person, it isn't usually because life stopped meaning anything. It's often because too much of life has required performance, and too little of it has allowed rest without conditions. The self that manages, adjusts, and holds things together needs somewhere it doesn't have to do any of that. When that space doesn't exist, exhaustion isn't a mystery. It's math. None of this means the feeling isn't worth taking seriously. Some of that math builds up in ways that genuinely need attention, sometimes from people trained to help carry it. But understanding the mechanism changes something. It replaces the question, "What's wrong with me?" with a more accurate one. What have I been carrying, unnoticed, for far too long? And what would it actually take to put some of it down? And if that question feels familiar, it's worth wondering where else in your life the same quiet arithmetic might be running, unseen, uncounted, and still adding up.